In my time, we did not have photographs, videos, or even audio recordings. Our records were written down or they were verbal. A person's words were considered to be true. Our society and most societies throughout all time have been based on people telling the truth. Is it any wonder you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor is one of the 10 Commandments? False testimony or lying was to be severely punished. The Old Testament also established that 2 witnesses provide conclusive proof of reality. Both Jesus and the religious leaders of his time adhered to the standard. Everyone in my culture adhered to this standard. Only 2 witnesses were needed. Our words were considered true, and only 2 witnesses provide conclusive proof of reality. So, is my story about truth? Sort of. It's really about death. Sort of. Both, actually.
At the very core of Christianity lies the pivotal belief of Jesus' resurrection. The resurrection shapes the Christian faith and has profoundly impacted lives and beliefs of countless believers throughout history.
Death. Not a popular subject in modern times. Almost unnatural to talk about. Creepy, even. Maybe because it's about the worst thing that can happen to someone, especially those who don't deserve to die. Death is so final. There are stories, you've heard them make the rounds, of someone who died and came back to life after a few seconds or minutes. But even those people eventually die and stay dead. It's the way it is. Everyone eventually dies and stays dead. That's the truth about death. The Bible tells of 8 different people who died, but were brought back to life. Some well-known, some obscure. The widow's son in Zarephath, the Shunammite's son, the man thrown into Elisha's grave, Jairus' daughter, the young man at Nain, Lazarus, Dorcas, and Eutychus. But these 8 eventually died and stayed dead. One additional mention of people coming back to life in the Bible, and it's a big one. An unknown number of people were brought back to life at the moment Jesus died. Yeah, Matthew chapter 27, verses 51 and 52. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead to life. Jesus died and dead people came back to life. Their tombs opened. It's weird. Really strange. But how do we know this happened? That it's the truth? Yes, it's in the Bible. But let's take a deeper look. Read on to the next verse, 53. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. After his resurrection, they came out of their tombs, went into the holy city? That's a whole other conversation, and a zombie movie almost. But let's stick to the last point. Appeared to many people. There were more than 2 people with the same story. Only 2 people are needed to establish truth. And they told the truth because they knew better than to lie. And if you're thinking, well, they could have been lying, you don't understand our culture at all. In your world, there's so much untruth going on that you've grown used to it. You have to have other means to prove things. My guess is you can't even imagine a world without photographs or videos or audio recordings. Your words aren't worth as much as these things. This underscores my point. For us, we took truth seriously. We took words seriously. It's all we had. It's all there was. This brings me to death and truth, and how I found myself caught in the middle. I was exposed to the horrifying cruelty and perverted violence enacted upon an innocent man. Traumatized. It was a man I knew and followed. So add paralyzing grief to the trauma. Jesus, executed like a common criminal. After his crucifixion, a few of Jesus' wealthy friends prepared his mangled body as best they could for burial. They placed him in a privately owned tomb, as the wealthy did. They rolled a heavy stone into a ditch in front of the grave's opening. The stone was immovable. Then the government sealed the stone. And to be extra thorough, they posted soldiers to guard it. Guarding an immovable stone in a dead body? Okay. Wouldn't want his friends stealing the body, is what they said. Somehow this threatened the powers at play in this whole scenario. Dead body, stone, guards. That was on a Friday night. Saturday was the Sabbath. Everyone had to stay home. Sunday morning, I went to the gravesite. No soldiers anywhere. Stone rolled to the side, grave clothes in the tomb. That's it. No dead body. I had shock to the trauma and grief. This next part, it's gonna sound weird. But I tell you the truth. Not my truth. The unequivocal truth. Jesus appears to me in a different kind of body. Not a ghost, just different. We talk. He tells me to go tell the others he's alive. Freeze. Right there, that moment. I know that Jesus brought others back to life, but that's a wholly different thing. This time, he was the one who was dead. I saw it. I was an eyewitness. But here he is, in front of me. And I am the first person to see resurrected Jesus. The truth about death is being challenged. He tells me to tell the others. What this means is now I will be the very first person who will witness to another person about Jesus, about him coming back from the dead. Stay in this moment, as if you don't know anything further, as if you don't know the rest of the story. All you know is a traumatized, grief-stricken woman in a state of shock has had an encounter, and she hasn't told a soul. Who will believe her? The witness is a woman. The woman is under great duress, and the story is outrageous. A person back from the dead, seen by one person whose testimony isn't even 50% of the requirement of 2 witnesses for conclusive proof, because that witness is me. At this point, I don't know if Jesus will appear to anyone else. I don't know if he will even be around if I leave. I don't know a lot of things, but what I do know is Jesus is no longer dead, but living. And he told me to go tell the others. That's quite a story to run all the way back and tell his devastated followers. Men whose lives are not only in flux, but totally derailed and in grave danger. The stakes are high. I reach the disciples. I tell them my story. They don't believe me. Can you blame them? It's an amazing story that's quite unbelievable. Death is final. That is the truth. And just one witness. It isn't long until I am not alone. I wouldn't be the only one with an incredible story of an encounter with the newly resurrected Lord. Jesus had already appeared to Peter. Then he appeared to a few disciples as they made their way home from Jerusalem, and then to believers in Jerusalem. And over the next 40 days, Jesus appeared to more than 500 people. Individuals, small groups, crowds during the day, at night, indoors, outside. This was not a collective hallucination or mass hysteria. The account of hundreds of people all reporting the same story within a very short time of the event. A consistent story. There isn't technology like you have. Just the trusted source of that time. Eyewitness accounts of people whose words are the truth. People who saw Jesus, alive and well, making all kinds of appearances, in a culture of truth-telling. A culture whose words were their bond. And all the eyewitness accounts aligned. It wasn't like a group thread. Hey, let's all say we saw Jesus. They don't have Photoshop. They don't have deep fakes, manipulating truths, covering up, lying. That was something people did when they were afraid of the actual truth. 500 plus accounts of resurrected Jesus encounters. We don't even need pictures. We don't need video or audio. We have 500 people telling the same story about the same man who was dead, but is now very much alive. Most of these people were still alive and affirming their testimony decades after it happened. Maybe you're saying, okay, Mary Magdalene, I get it. It's true. Jesus came back from the dead, so what's the big deal about that? I'll let the Apostle Paul answer that. In his first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 15, he talks about Jesus' resurrection and the many appearances afterward. In verses 3 through 19, Paul says the resurrection of Jesus is the most important thing to be true. If it isn't true, Christians are not only wasting their time, but are to be pitied above all people. The validity of the Christian faith hangs on the resurrection of Jesus being true. Death had no power over Jesus. He wasn't like those who die, or the stories of people who die and are resurrected only to die again, or people with near-death experience who come back but eventually die. Jesus was different. Jesus overcame death because of who he is, the Son of God. John wrote, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Jesus was sent from God. He was brought back to life by God. Jesus' resurrection is the proof that he is the Son of God. So, what happened after his resurrection? After 40 days of being on earth, Jesus takes his followers to the Mount of Olives, where not long before he had been arrested. He raises his hands to bless them. And again, it's going to sound weird, he starts rising in the air. He's enveloped by a cloud. All his followers were looking intently up into the sky when two men in white stood beside them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why do you stand here looking into the sky? The same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." Jesus was taken to heaven. God raised Jesus from the dead, and Jesus has lived with God ever since. None of this was an accident. None of this was a surprise to God. This was all according to God's plan. Peter spoke to a crowd saying it was God's deliberate plan that he had planned in advance. And why would God have planned this in advance? He had a big ending in mind. Just as God resurrected Jesus, he will resurrect all of the followers of Jesus. God has chosen the followers of Jesus as his family to live with him forever. Death and truth? The truth about death? It's not final after all. The resurrection of Jesus changed death's narrative once and for all, and brought life, eternal life to all Jesus' followers, life that starts the moment you begin following him. It all hinges on Jesus' resurrection. No photos, no video, and no audio recordings necessary. Look no further than the conclusive proof of the eyewitnesses.